Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not there in person today, but I am absolutely delighted that we've held not one, but two India Workgroup meetings in 2019. I'm so glad with this progress, and I think we're also going to do great things ahead in 2020. Let's take a moment to review the year that has just passed. When we entered 2019, OpenChain had three goals. One was to increase the size of our community of conformants, the amount of companies with publicly announced OpenChain conformant programs. Another was to increase the size of the partner program, building out a support network to help companies become OpenChain conformant if they wanted support from consultancies, law firms, certifiers, and so on. We also wanted to build out activities across China, Japan, Korea, and India. We had some activities in Japan already, but we didn't have Chinese, Korean, or Indian work groups. Now, we succeeded in all three of these areas. Our community of conformants went from 20 publicly announced conformant programs to 35, and there are more coming in the early new year. We have some exciting announcements to start 2020. But the progress this year was fantastic. Our partner program also more than doubled to 21 announced partners. Again, we have more partners to announce in the early new year. There's a lot of momentum. And we have work groups not only in China, Japan, Korea, and India, but also Taiwan. So great progress and very exciting. Now, our current position is that we are networking hundreds of companies around the world. And we have some very exciting partners like PricewaterhouseCoopers and CMS Law Firm, which have international reach. And we've made significant progress on turning OpenChain into an ISO standard. One of the interesting things this year has been the launch of global work groups. We currently have automotive and tooling work groups. The automotive work group has well over 100 participants, and somewhere in the region of 60 companies involved. Automotive makers and suppliers in Asia, in Europe, and the United States are participating. Our tooling work group likewise has over 100 participants. It's very active in talking about how we can see the development of reference open source tooling for open source compliance. In particular, the idea of reference tool chains that can be very quickly adopted and run by companies, even if the companies don't have a great deal of engineering experience or open source compliance tooling experience. Everyone is welcome to join these work groups, and we expect some exciting developments across both in 2020. Now, third-party certification around OpenChain has been an important milestone for the project. We basically have three ways of meeting the OpenChain standard. One, and the core of our project, is self-certification. Companies going through a checklist and seeing if they meet the key requirements of a quality open source compliance program. The second method is what's called independent compliance assessment, and that's when a company is self-certifying, but an outside party, maybe a law firm, maybe a certifier, has a look at the self-certification process and lets the company know if they think there's room for improvement. And the third way to become OpenChain conformant is full third-party certification. That's when a formal certifier actually goes through the process with the company, and the company that's certified has an official documentation that shows that someone like PwC or TÜV officially certifies them as OpenChain conformant. I'm excited because in 2019 we have two global certifiers supporting OpenChain. We expect most people to self-certify, and we expect third-party certification to be a relatively small percentage of the OpenChain community at this stage in our evolution, but it's really important, and it's a very nice milestone that such a certification is available. It speaks to the maturity of our standard. Speaking of maturity, OpenChain is on track to be an ISO standard in the first half of 2020. We're working with Joint Development Foundation, an initiative inside the Linux Foundation ecosystem to bring together open source and standards. Joint Development Foundation has what's called pass submitter status. This means they can take existing standards, de facto industry standards, and bring them into the ISO process and make them into a formal ISO standard. OpenChain is the first Linux Foundation standard going through the pass process, and we're going to be the vanguard. The first one has an ISO standard in the first half of 2020. Very exciting indeed. Now, talking about the activities in OpenChain, we have activities across Asia. In Japan, we've seen some really nice developments. Around 72 companies and 176 people are actively involved in OpenChain meetings and our mailing list. It's very, very nicely growing community. 2 years now it's been operational, so it's not new, but it has lovely momentum and great collaboration. Korea, we started in January 2019. We've already held 4 meetings. The first 2, LG Electronics and Samsung. The next 2, SK Telecom and Korea Telecom. So nice big companies involved and very positive community, lots of active contributors in translation and sharing of ideas. India, of course, well, you know this. You started in September. And it's wonderful that we're having the second meeting this year, so India is on track for quarterly meetings. I think that this is going to be one of the work groups where we have the most chance to influence a great deal of companies, not only in Asia, but also in Europe and America. So I think we've got a lot to do in 2020, and I'm really excited to work with you on this. We started in China in September as well. Our first meeting was held in Shenzhen at Huawei, and our second meeting was held just this month at Baidu. And that was a very exciting meeting because it was in Beijing, and we had a whole bunch of Beijing companies come together to share thoughts and notes. In early next year, the third China meeting will take place. It will be hosted by Xiaomi, a company which, of course, is very well known in India. They recently sold their 180 million handset in the Indian market. We're looking forward to continuing to work with our friends and partners in China. Companies ranging from cloud to consumer electronics to automotive to drones. Exciting things there. Now, we also have some great activities in Taiwan. We started in September there as well. We have a lot of support on the ground from community organizations like the Open Source Legal Network Taiwan, but also companies like Moxa. And what's really exciting is that they've announced an incredibly busy schedule for 2020. I just found out this week that they plan to have meetings every month across 2020. So for perspective, the OpenChain Japan Work Group meets every 2 months, China every 3 months, Korea every 3 months, and India every 3 months. So Taiwan is a little bit exceptional, but it seems to work well for their plans, and I'm looking forward to supporting them in 2020. Now, we've been wrapping up the year here in Linux Foundation with compliance at the front. We just held the Open Compliance Summit in Tokyo, 2 days, 118 attendees, 64 organizations, 10 keynotes, 50% female, 50% male, as it should be. Very glad about this. 18 talks and 4 panels. Every keynote and every talk was just 20 minutes for the actual talk and questions, so really focused on getting to the point quickly. Our panels were the same, 30 minutes. Enough time to bring up some important things, no time for padding or filler, just really, really good on detail. Exciting thing about the Open Compliance Summit. Our target this year was to make it the Global Compliance Summit, and we succeeded. 69% of companies attending were international, 31% Japanese. Great audience from across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, and I'm very excited about what we will do next year. Now, the Open Compliance Summit gave us a chance to make some really cool announcements. Uber announced that they're OpenChain conformant. PricewaterhouseCoopers formally announced their global third-party certification. We had our first Vietnamese translation, this time of a supplier education leaflet. We had a Japanese interview with Ayumi-san from Hitachi, explaining how she entered open source, how she builds her career in this field. We had another interview from Kyungye at LG Electronics, again talking about the evolution of her work inside her company and inside the open source community in Korea. And because we had those two announced on the 17th, and just prior to the event, we had an interview from Maggie in China, we were delighted to say that in just 1 week, we had interviews in China, Japan, and Korea published, underlining just how international the community is. And of course, this brings me to the next topic, which is it's time for our Indian interviews. Let's do a bunch of Indian interviews in the first couple of months of 2020 to help inspire more people to engage with our community. Not just OpenChain, not just open source compliance, but the entire idea of engaging with open source as professionals and sharing experiences together. What's coming next? Okay, first half of 2020, we expect OpenChain to be an ISO standard. The earliest is early April, and fingers crossed we'll be there, but even if we push back a little, first half 2020. That's very exciting, and it means that throughout 2020 we're going to be preparing and then deploying material to support our large-scale rollout in the global supply chain. The big thing here will be making sure that there's plenty of educational material for procurement departments, business decision makers, so even if they're not really familiar with open source, they can clearly understand that the OpenChain ISO standard is the standard for open source compliance and should be included in discussions with suppliers to ensure quality and efficiency. Second half of 2020 onwards, we'll be talking about how to improve the OpenChain standard. This is not really about rewriting the standard. Indeed, we don't expect to update the OpenChain standard itself for 5 to 10 years, but improving the materials supporting the standard and the processes we can offer to help people meet the standard. So we're going to be using real-world feedback to create real-world solutions and just make it easier, quicker, and more effective for everyone. And that's where we're at. The end of the year is imminent. Your meeting is the last OpenChain meeting of 2019. And the big question is, what do we do next to create success? What do we do to create success in the Indian market to support companies? What do we do to create success across the Asian region? And what do we do to make sure that people in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, can share the right information at the right times as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Well, those are your questions. It's your meeting today. And all I can say is good luck. I'm encouraging you to have a great discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing what you come up with and helping realize it in early 2020.